Thanks for joining me today. I know it's really hot in here, so I appreciate it. Today we're going to talk about what I call Web3 marketing. Marketing is maybe not the best term to describe this, but I hope that you'll get the gist of what I mean by marketing in the context of Web3. I'm Patrick. I founded Lighthouse, which is an attestation service. What that means is that it's an environment in which a community can spin up its own sort of environment and collect contributions from members of the community and then attest them, so basically validate them and put them on chain so that the community can use those attestations however they'd like. So what's the goal of Web2 marketing? I think we've all had enough experience with marketing in Web2 to kind of understand that for most companies it's about making money. In the Web2 paradigm, the whole idea is for a company to be able to own a user. And what I mean by own a user is basically collect their data and use that data to its own ends. If you take a company like Google, it's collecting data on users, and it's doing it without your knowledge a lot of the time. And it's doing it freely, it just collects it. And then the whole idea is to use your data to be able to predict your behavior or create a behavior for you and monetize that behavior. In Web3, data works a little bit differently. So there is public data, it's on chain and anyone can use it. And you can choose what you decide to put on chain. You can have off-chain data and you can make that data on chain so that it's verifiable and shareable. And there are different ways of doing that. That's what Lighthouse does. And you also have this notion of communication. So today, when you're surfing around the web, you get served ads. You can receive emails as well that are unsolicited. And right now, although there are a lot of projects working on building Web3-based communication, it's still really nascent. So we don't really know what it's going to look like, how it's going to be facilitated, or to what extent you'll be able to opt in or out of those services. I'm going to work a lot with this paradigm here. So this is a Venn diagram. In Web3, we have sort of three stakeholders. We have an investor, a user, and we have workers or contributors. But before we get into this, I want to go over what's the goal of Web3 marketing? Well, ironically, it's kind of similar. We're all looking to get more value out of the token that's part of a protocol or a dApp or whatever. So it's not super different from Web2. What's interesting about it, though, is who benefits from the value that's created in a dApp or on a protocol. Right now, there are different tools that we use to do this. So we can contrive value. So we can try and limit the supply by introducing staking, by incentivizing holding behavior, by using vesting tokens. There's all these different ways that we try and reduce the amount of tokens on the market so that we can increase the value. We see a lot of airdrops, whitelist spots, raffles, and these are ways of bringing people into new communities, new dApps, and you're basically getting free stuff, which can be really cool. And then you also have this whole idea of social status. So if you get an early NFT collection that symbolizes something, that indicates something to other people, and in and of itself, that might have some value. And then there are other ways of doing it that are a little bit more inherent to the creation of a dApp or a protocol or a Web3 project. It's building real utility in. In terms of workers, you want to be able to pay them so that they can live their lives, maybe get some governance over the protocol or the application itself. What's cool about this is that we already started using these tools, but we're not necessarily using them with a clear objective in mind. So what I've done is I've taken this sort of Venn diagram and I've broken it down into different parts. So you have overlaps between these circles. You have investor workers, you have user contributors, you have some people that are all of these things. And if we want to translate what that means into, say, real groups, we might have something called most valuable members. These are people that are all investors, users, and contributors to a project. Or paid users, which is kind of a weird term, but basically people that hold the token to use a dApp or use a protocol. Or you can think of this maybe as a SaaS-like model where you have free users that are able to use a service without actually using the token to use the service. And then you have, on the contributor side, people that are freelancing. So people that are just contributing to a project, you're just paying them maybe USD, USDC, but they don't have any stake. They don't own a piece of the project. And then you have people that are really invested in this. These are like passionate builders, people that are part of the core team, that have tokens in a project, that are invested in it. And then you have what I call speculators. So these are people that just own tokens or trade the token, but they don't really take part in the actual community or project. So I'm not saying this is the right way of going about it, but this is one way of going about it. You might want to favor certain groups over other groups. So you might want to incentivize people that are actually creating value, contributing value, or have the potential to do so in the future. And you might want to disincentivize people that aren't creating value. The whole idea is to align these stakeholders as much as possible. So a perfect alignment would look like this. It might be something that we strive for. It might be unattainable, though. If you have a completely contrived system, then you're basically setting up a system so that the incentives amongst these three groups are misaligned, and you even exclude some of the overlaps that we saw in the previous diagram. And this might not be super beneficial to the community in the long term. So if you have a lot of people that are contributing to a project and don't have stake in that project, what are they really doing there? How are they really like part of your community or team? In Web2 marketing, there's this concept called R. It's the pirate metrics. It stands for acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. And all of these are sort of user journeys that you build into a product in order to get people to stay on the product longer, in order to extract value from them. In Web3, it's a little bit different. So if you have people that are interacting with a community or a product but aren't getting any value out of that, you might want to create a journey for them, a user path, for them to move from someone who's not really engaged with the project to be more engaged with the project. You might want to expand the user base. So this is just pure acquisition. You want more people to join your community so that you have a user base to draw on to convert those people into contributors or stronger stakeholders. And ultimately, you kind of want to create a path so that they become your most valuable members. Then there's this whole notion that's kind of on the side, which is what is the desired level of decentralization? And I'm not talking about technical decentralization. I'm talking about people participating in an organization. Should everyone have the same say? Should people have different says in the governance of an organization? And what does that actually look like? Like, should financial value and governance power, for example, be correlated? The reason I bring this up is because over the past 6 months with Lighthouse, we've interviewed something like 100 different DAOs, decentralized communities, projects, and what consistently comes up is how they want to value members. And currently, in a lot of cases, you're kind of limited to one single native token that you'll distribute for a bunch of different things. So someone who's working might receive tokens as payment, and then they have to sell those tokens to buy food, to pay rent, and they actually lose their governance power in doing so. So is there a way to maybe create more interesting incentives around this? So one way of doing this is taking contributions, on-chain, off-chain, anything that represents something that benefits the community, attesting it, so validating that someone actually did that, so that you can draw on that to be able to do different things. So what can you do? You might give compensations. This can be in USDC, this can be in the native token, it can be however you decide to remunerate someone, and it doesn't really matter. It's purely financial. It's the money part of this. The second part is governance. So as people begin getting more implicated into a community, you might want to give them ownership in the community. So you might want to separate the whole idea of governance from compensation. And you have this whole notion of reputation that a lot of people are working on today. And this is something that we see pretty often, and it takes so many different forms. So this whole idea of soul-bound tokens, for example, is part of reputation. But it's not just NFTs. It can be normal, non-transferable tokens that work like points, for example. Or they can be rebase tokens that rebase based on the proportional contribution of individuals so that represents the governance, that the amount of governance that they have in a protocol or a dApp. So if you imagine the system sort of beginning to take hold and forming, what this ends up doing when you begin generating attestations within a community is it lets a community decide who has value and how that value should be denominated in tokens. Whether that's a reputation token, whether it's a governance token, whether it's a financial token, it gives communities a much wider flexibility in how they decide to deliver value to the members of the community. You can also, so what this does is it creates a market for talent. So if all of these attestations are on-chain and we know who the leaders in a community are, other communities might see that and say, that person looks interesting. So we begin to create a market for talent. And this is what I mean by marketing. This whole idea of marketing isn't about just getting users to adopt a community, to adopt a protocol or a dApp or participate in a community. It's really about encouraging people to contribute to a community in order to create value for everyone. That's why marketing's, at least in the Web3 context, quite different than marketing in a Web2 context. The other thing this enables is this whole idea of fluid hierarchies. So some of the things that we see are, can the top 5 contributors in marketing have access to or govern Discord or Twitter or something like that? And so that can be really fluid. So you just look at who's ranked at the top of the community, and you give them rights to be able to govern these different services. And then this whole idea of focusing on utility or social value, people can build communities around different ideologies or philosophies or different types of value using the same attestation service. Some of the challenges we face today in getting there is this idea of communication. So you don't have a way of really reaching out to people. Sometimes you'll get airdropped like an NFT or something in your wallet, and you're like, oh, what's that? And then you'll go and look it up, and maybe it interests you, maybe it doesn't. We don't know what the right level of decentralization is. So should a core team be 5 people, 10 people, 1 million people? Who actually is contributing, to what extent, and why do you want it to be a large number of people versus a small number of people? We're still building early tooling, so if a billion people adopt Web3 technologies in the future, what does that look like? Probably like we have to invest a lot in user experience, in UI, and those tools might look very different than what is being built today. And then just simply, there's not that many people working on this stuff today. I mean, there can always be more people. And that could lead to a lot more interesting ideas that emerge and actually get adopted by us. So that's my talk. If you have any questions, let me know.
Is there any questions?
Yeah, sure. So when I started working on Lighthouse with my co-founder back in December, the whole idea was to try and build reputation systems. So we started thinking about how we could build monolithic scores for, say, like credit scoring or DeFi or something like that, or just social scores like, you know, like a diamond hand score or something like that. And when we started interviewing all these different communities, everyone had a different interpretation of what that actually meant. What data is included, how you work that data, and how that actually translates into a score. So over the course of these 6 months, we basically iterated on that concept, and essentially we said, why not build the most generic thing ever, which is anyone can determine what a contribution is and just log that on chain and then value that subsequently. So you don't have to force anyone to create a score or value something in a certain way. You can do that after the fact. So if you go to lighthouse.xyz, you can test out the app. We just launched it in beta on Monday, so it's still really, really early. Thanks, guys.